What you're about to watch is a Nebula original, meaning it was first released on Nebula, the streaming site founded by myself and plenty of other creators. Producing this documentary was an enormous project which involved flying myself and a crew 10,000 miles to one of the most remote places on Earth, and it was entirely funded by CuriosityStream. That's because CuriosityStream has partnered with Nebula to offer a bundle deal where, if you sign up at curiositystream.com/Wendover, you also get a Nebula subscription. Easy as that. On there you'll find loads of other great originals by independent creators, but for now, to the documentary. It was this precise moment, early on a Saturday afternoon in October 2017, that changed the course of history for one of the world's most remote societies. This moment that ended 500 years of isolation from the world, cutting travel time to there from 6 days on a boat to 6 hours on a plane. It was this small moment that changed everything for the island. An island where the thing they need most of all, as much as it might hurt, is change. It was this moment that long in the future will be recognized as the single most consequential ever for the island of St. Helena. You'd be forgiven for not knowing exactly what or where St. Helena is. It's not a place that one hears a whole lot about. If you have heard of it, that's likely thanks to Napoleon. It's here on St. Helena where the infamous Emperor of France was exiled by the British for the 6 years preceding his death. Since then, though, the island has been up to quite a bit. It's now home to about 4,500 of the friendliest people you'll ever meet. Walking a block through its capital of Jamestown, it's tough to go without saying hi and hello a half dozen times. Driving past someone without giving a wave? Well, that's practically a crime. Saints, as the residents are called, are as proudly British as they come and fly their Union Jacks copiously and conspicuously. The island is, after all, a British overseas territory. Life on St. Helena is quite unlike life in the UK, though. They've got their own money, their own accent, their own culture, their own government, but most of all, what makes life on St. Helena different is where it is. The island sits in the same neighborhood as nothing. Mainland Africa is 1,100 miles or 1,800 kilometers to its east. Mainland South America is about 2,000 miles or 3,300 kilometers to its west. London is over 4,600 miles or 7,500 kilometers to its north. St. Helena's isolation defines and shapes it in absolutely every way, including, perhaps most consequentially, economically. You see, St. Helena is not a wealthy place. Its GDP per capita averages just above $12,000 compared to about $40,000 in the UK. The issue is that getting people and things to and from the middle of nowhere costs a great deal. So there just aren't too many industries that can profitably operate on a place as tiny and isolated as St. Helena. The Saints have found a few though. Beyond the traditional goods and services sectors that any small community would have, St. Helena does have exports.
Coffee, we have some of the rarest coffee in the world, which sells for, I know, 90 to 100 pounds in the United Kingdom for just 100 grams. If we could increase that to some extent, that would bring revenue to many of the farmers on the island.
They also sell a good amount of tuna and honey, but then there's another sector that capitalizes on the island's isolation.
The predominant economy here at the moment is there is niche tourism, diving, history, natural history, walking tours, bird watching, those sorts of things. Plus also a growing market of people who want to get away from it all, are 1 week away from the internet. And given the internet prices here, that's quite easy to achieve if you want to do it.
But tourism would be nothing without a means to get off and on to St. Helena Island. It was only recently that this became something the government had to worry about. In the early days of the island's human history, shipping was what brought a population to it. It was the perfect stopping point on the route from the Far East to Europe around the Cape of Good Hope. So perfect, in fact, that for a while, the entire island was run by the British East India Company. Eventually, though, the Suez Canal opened, and so fewer boats would round the southern tip of Africa. This, of course, diminished St. Helena's importance. But still, up until the 1970s, the island served as a regular stopping point for ocean liners traveling between the UK and South Africa, meaning there was a reliable link to the outside world. But then, throughout the 20th century, as air travel grew more popular and profitable, passenger ocean liners around the world increasingly struggled to fill their ships, and one by one, closed down. The last shipping line with passenger service to St. Helena collapsed in 1977, leaving the island marooned, with no way to get to the outside world. The British stepped in, buying a ship for their overseas territory, which would be called the RMS St. Helena. The RMS was part cargo ship, part passenger ship. In the front, she carried dozens of shipping containers, acting as the primary supply line for the island, and in the back, she was adorned with pools and bars and sun loungers. Her regular journey consisted of the 5 nights from Cape Town to St. Helena, then she would continue on to Ascension Island in 2 or 3 nights, where she would meet and connect her passengers to one of the bi-weekly Royal Air Force flights to the UK. This method, via Ascension, allowed travelers to get from the UK to St. Helena in relative speed, just 4 days. Most, though, took the longer route from South Africa. Locals and tourists alike adored the RMS. She was thought of as the perfect transition from St. Helena to the outside world, or vice versa. She was a legendary, storied vessel, but after decades of heavy use shuttling passengers to and from the island, in the early 2000s, the RMS was getting old and worn, and the government started to think about what would replace her. Initial assessments found that replacing the ship would cost up to $100 million. This led to the question, with that kind of money, was a ship really the best option? The answer, it turned out, was probably not. After decades of feasibility studies, discussions, debates, false starts, delays, and bidding, a contract was produced, and with a few quick signatures, life on St. Helena would change forever. St. Helena was getting an airport.
The contract was signed in November 2011, and that's when Basil Reid arrived on the island to start basically looking at the infrastructure logistics. They started the first construction or the first moving of soil in 2015 November, and obviously they built various roads up to the airport because they had to get the logistics up to the airport. They also had a ship that brought in all the materials, logistics, all the spares, equipment that had to obviously help to build the airport. So they constructed it over 4 years. At the end of 2015, the runway was completed. Most of the terminal buildings were completed. Most of the CNS equipment, which is communication and navigation equipment, was installed, and the airport was ready for a certification at the end of October 2015.
New airports are rare. New airports in places that have never had an airport before are even rarer. Getting an empty husk of an airport certified and staffed is no easy task. For this to happen on St. Helena, subcontractors were streaming through the island. There were audits upon audits upon audits. Staff members were recruited. Locals were trained both on and off island for jobs like security, immigration, firefighting, and more. Emergency procedures were written, public meetings were conducted, airport vehicles were shipped in, instruments were calibrated, beacons and localizers and obstacle lights were installed, a logo was designed, calibration flights came in, emergency drills were conducted, drone logs were codified, operational trials were run, and then finally, in February 2016, the airport was certified and ready to open. Commercial flights could start, and St. Helena would achieve its decades-long ambition of having an air link to the outside world. There was just one more step. As one last hurdle of bureaucracy, Comair, the airline contracted to operate flights to St. Helena, wanted to perform an implementation flight, as they called it. Essentially, they were going to fly one of their planes in to test that everything, from the instruments to the runway to the terminal to the fuel system, worked. Now, Comair was really the perfect airline to connect St. Helena to the world. They're a British Airways franchisee, meaning they are contracted by British Airways to operate their regional flights from South Africa and therefore fly a number of routes around the region under the British Airways brand. The plan was for Comair to operate a British Airways route non-stop from Johannesburg to St. Helena. These flights would seamlessly connect to other British Airways flights to the 2 locations Saints travel most, Cape Town and London. as well as with hundreds of other destinations around the world. With the exception of a direct flight to the UK, there's really nothing better St. Helena Airport could have wished for. They just had to do the implementation flight. So, on one sunny, nearly cloudless April day in 2016, a Comair 737 appeared off in the distance to the north of St. Helena Airport carrying a handful of staff members of the airline and airport construction company. It approached, wheels up, in order to perform a flyby above the runway as planned. After gaining altitude again, it circled back around in order to make a second and final approach. But then, just seconds away from touchdown, there was a sort of wobble. Then another one. Then once its wheels were just feet above the runway, the pilots elected to abort the landing, go around, and give it another shot. So the plane circled around again, and after some more wobbling, came to a landing. The first ever landing of a commercial passenger jet on the island, even if it wasn't carrying commercial passengers. St. Helena was thrilled.
I'm here with Bezel Reid's Island Director, Diane Diaka. Diane, you just arrived on the first passenger jet to land here on St. Helena. Can you describe the experience?
Great experience. I mean, it's just a cherry on the cake after the 4 years work. Friday morning I flew out on the SE flight. I went home, spent the weekend with the family, played golf yesterday, and today I'm back on the island. And I mean, that's the signs of the times, eh? Yeah. And that's the whole reason for the airport, is to be able to travel back and forth as you please.
Yeah. Susan O'Bey and Graham Vest, guys, you were here to witness the first ever passenger jet land on St. Helena. First of all, you, Graham, how does it feel? Or can you describe the experience?
It was absolutely amazing, and I feel really privileged to be here at this momentous occasion. It really is such a historic event. I feel absolutely wonderful. I feel proud of everything that's been done by you guys on the island. Thank you.
Okay. And you, Susan?
Excited, extremely excited. This is like the culmination of weeks, months, years of hard work, as far back as 2005, and we're really, really proud of everything that's been achieved today.
This is the first step, a plane landing on St. Helena. What does this now mean for tourism on St. Helena?
Well, now we've got the gateway to get people here. Before we had to rely on the ship, the RMS coming backwards and forwards. This means we can have a steady stream. At first it'll be that Saturday flight people will get used to, and then once that's been filling up, hopefully we'll have a midweek one, and that's the way we can really develop tourism. And it becomes worth people investing in restaurants, bars, other things that'll help the tourists here. So the start of a new era for St. Helena.
Everyone was ecstatic, but at the time, nobody fully understood what had just happened. You see, this little wobble, just before landing, had just derailed the decades-long plan for St. Helena's new era. That wobble was evidence of wind shear, a phenomenon where wind traveling in one direction meets wind traveling in another direction and creates a zone of turbulent air. In St. Helena's case, its wind shear was due to the already strong wind being pushed around and rerouted by the enormous cliffs at the northern end of its runway. When coming in to land an airplane, wind is already a hassle, but when it quickly shifts, as in the case of wind shear, it can be a lot worse. The first sign to the general public that something was wrong was when the St. Helena government postponed the long-scheduled airport opening ceremony, which was planned to be presided upon by Prince Andrew. Eventually, it emerged that the solution would be to land planes from the south, as there was not a wind shear issue from this direction. But this did have its own issues. Planes generally like to land into the wind, as this allows them to stop faster on the runway, but at the airport, wind almost always comes from the south, meaning planes would be landing with a tailwind. In order to successfully land a 737 with a tailwind on the length of runway offered at St. Helena, the 737 would have to be quite light. It wouldn't be able to take its full capacity of passengers or cargo. In fact, it would have to shed so much weight that the flight would never be commercially profitable for Comair, even with the planned subsidies, and so, unceremoniously, it was announced that Comair, and therefore British Airways, would not be running the flights to St. Helena. Eventually, the story of St. Helena Airport reached the world. The British tabloids got their hands on it and ripped it to shreds. They called the airport embarrassing, a gaffe, a folly, a farcical vanity project. Much of what was reported wasn't even accurate. Tabloids said it was impossible to land. They said the airport was closed, neither of which was true. In fact, throughout the delay, private and medevac flights were coming in and out with no problem. The media latched on to the video of that Calm Air implementation flight and, as one outlet called it, the terrifying 3 attempts it took to land. In reality, it was 1 planned flyby, 1 aborted landing, and 1 successful landing. In the world of commercial aviation, aborted landings are nothing exceptional. They happen many times a day at airports large and small all around the world. Most of all though, the common thread between all the media reports was the nickname St. Helena Airport received: the world's most useless airport. That was the one that stung.
And I think a lot of the sort of initial label given by the popular media has not helped the island, and I think it's totally false, quite frankly.
We knew that St. Helena was going to get a lot of flack over it from the media. We didn't quite appreciate how much it was going to feature, but it became a lot about how bad the British government had done in investing in this airport on St. Helena and putting it in the wrong place, essentially.
When the bad press hit of St. Helena having a white elephant for an airport, I was really angry. And still to today, in my professional capacity, we are countering and battling to get rid of that negativity. It is really bad, and people doesn't want to see the good that is actually happening.
Since all of those articles, we've had to spend a lot of time, I suppose, trying to sell the island for its positive aspects, and also show, things like there's only been 1 cancellation in the entire year this year. But those things are harder to get through than the sensationalist stuff that sells papers.
You always have starting out problems, and what would you expect? We are in the middle of the South Atlantic. This is the first time for it to happen. So you got to have trial and error, and I wish people would just leave the error now aside and look at what is happening as a result.
In order to shrug off that nickname, they needed, of course, a flight.
So we had to do a lot of research. So we commissioned our UK Met Office to do a lot of research on our wind data. So we collated a lot of wind data over 6 months, 12 months, so we could ascertain exactly what the conditions were on runway 20 and runway 02. Once we got all that data into place, then the SHG government went out with a new tender looking for an aircraft that could actually land runway 02, which had a 15-knot tailwind component.
It was runway 20 that had the wind shear issue, not runway 02. These two are, in fact, the same physical runway, but runway 20 refers to the landing coming from the north. Runway 02 refers to the landing from the south. The prevailing winds originate from the south, so the key to a safe landing was an aircraft small enough to stop safely within the length of the runway even when wind pushes it from behind. That way, if the wind shear from the north is too bad, it can land from the south. The service was not to be subsidized, but rather underwritten.
There isn't a subsidy per passenger, so they don't get paid, let's say, £10 per passenger per flight at all. It's very much a commercial service, but if that commercial service makes a loss, that loss is underwritten by DFID in the UK.
2 main bidders emerged to operate the flights to St. Helena. The first was a company called Atlantic Star Airlines. Founded in 2012, still the early days of the airport construction process, Atlantic Star was created specifically to serve as an airline for St. Helena. Their original plan was to make weekly flights directly from London to St. Helena via some midway refueling stop, in addition to a weekly flight to Cape Town. It was an ambitious plan, but they were serious about it. The company consisted of seasoned aviation executives and professionals, including a CEO who came from British Airways. Over time, though, the plane was scaled back to operating a few charter flights a year from London to St. Helena via Banjul in the Gambia. This was going to happen. They had an agreement with TUI Airlines to charter a 737, they had announced schedules, they had set fares, but then, of course, the airport's opening was delayed, and these flights were all cancelled. After some time, in October 2016, Atlantic Star came back into the story by chartering an Avro RJ1000 to fly to the island and run a series of test landings, a move the company tried to use as evidence of their legitimacy in the bidding process. The proposal was that they would lease an Avro jet to be based on St. Helena as the island's dedicated aircraft. Twice a week, they would fly the hour-and-a-half north to Ascension Island to connect with the bi-weekly RAF flights to the UK. Having the aircraft based on St. Helena would, according to their bid, be quite the benefit for the island, considering that it could, at a moment's notice, fly medical evacuation flights rather than waiting for a plane to fly in from South Africa to pick a patient up. Ultimately, though, the bid failed. The other major bid submitted to the St. Helena government was by a South African airline called Airlink. Their plan was to fly an Embraer E190 jet to St. Helena once weekly on Saturdays. The aircraft would fly from Johannesburg to Windhoek, Namibia, where it would meet another service coming in from Cape Town. This connecting structure was viewed as quite important since, while most of the Saint diaspora is in Cape Town, Johannesburg is the larger airport and offers more connections. From Windhoek, it would then fly the 3 hours over the South Atlantic to land in St. Helena. It would then do the same in reverse. Included in Airlink's bid was an agreement to operate once-monthly charter flights from St. Helena to Ascension Island as an add-on to their flight from Johannesburg, giving that island, which primarily serves as a military base for the UK and US, its only regularly scheduled non-military flight to the outside world. This bid was as close to perfect St. Helena was going to get. On July 21, 2017, the St. Helena government signed a contract with Airlink and announced to the world that this tiny South Atlantic outpost was finally getting its connection to the world. St. Helena was getting a flight. For real this time. A few months later, just over a year after that Comair flight had arrived in the skies above St. Helena, an Airlink Embraer E190 did the same. It was filled with 70 or so journalists, tourists, and saints, and soon enough safely touched down and was greeted by, well, a big proportion of St. Helena. That was St. Helena's before and after moment. Once those wheels touched down, St. Helena would never be the same. But once that happened, once the honeymoon period was over, it was time for St. Helena to get to work. Realizing the full potential of the airport was no easy task. Of course, the natural environment presented its own issues, but the true challenge lies in the island's geographic isolation and political independence, which mean that, in all aspects, the airport has to be entirely self-sufficient. They're not run by some big company, they're not part of any national system. St. Helena Airport is run by St. Helena Airport Limited, and if Gwyneth Howell, its CEO, doesn't know what to do, there's not really anyone she can call. That means that everything needed to run St. Helena Airport, from administrative to operational, has to happen at St. Helena Airport. It turns out that, even with just one weekly flight, that's quite a lot.
So what we have is, for example, in this room here, we have what's called CNS, so Communications, Navigations and Surveillance. So we have two guys, one who works on IT side of things, one who works on the navigation aids and so on. And they're really crucial to the running of the airport. Now, without the communication navigation system, without those kind of IT systems in place, we wouldn't be able to land aircraft and take off aircraft here at the airport. So that's extremely important. CEO's office, obviously we need a chief executive officer for St. Helena Airport Limited, and then there's my office next door. I'm kind of the CEO's right-hand person, so I will always be there to support them, but I'm also kind of separate as well, because I'm meant to be there to be the conscience almost of the company, to do the thinking, to do the questioning. Why are we doing it like that? Could we do it another way? Could we do it a safer way? Could we do it a better way? So that's a pretty important role. So if we carry on this way, actually, this is an important room to look in. It's the gym. And it's where our RFS team keep fit. It's being in the firefighting service. It's a very physical job, so you need to be fit all the time. And in fact, there are fitness levels to be met. So the gym is an important part of that. Hello, Bill.
Hello.
Security. And because I'm not security cleared, I can't go in there. Even though I'm sort of senior management team, there are still levels of security that some of us can't get into, and this is one room that I'm not permitted to go into, and rightly so. So if you want to follow me down in the rest of the combined building. So we have a training room, so there's an awful lot of training that goes on for staff. We need to meet, we need to be accredited in many respects, so there's a lot of training that goes on security in particular, but also firefighting as well. So that's our training room. And walking on further down, we also have a maintenance bay as well, which I'll briefly open the door and walk in. So the maintenance bay is where we obviously maintain equipment. We have a lot of equipment to maintain, and we have an on-site mechanic who does so. So we also use it for storage as well. So this, for example, is a tow barless tug. Allows us to tow aircraft if we need to, and other bits and pieces like the toilet cart and so on. So it's a multi-purpose bay. We use it for storage and we use it for maintaining our vehicles. So if we're moving along, finally come to the end. And it's the most important room in the building because these people make sure we get paid. So here we have, good afternoon. We have HR and finance, extremely important to running a small but compact airport. But nevertheless, there's all the HR and the financial functions that go with that.
In addition to all the administrative functions, St. Helena Airport, while it might need less of it, needs all the same things that an enormous airport like Heathrow would need. A striking example of this is the fire service.
ICAO regulation basically states that every airport have to have some sort of firefighter category. It really depends on the movement of the aircraft within that airfield. That's regulation, and that is what we have to provide. We are always on standby, so if there's an aircraft emergency right now and we get the crash alarms go, we can provide a 3-minute response to the runway.
That's despite the fact that most days there isn't a single aircraft within hundreds of miles of the island. But nonetheless, it's what's required by regulation. Even at an airport with thousands of weekly flights, it's not as if firefighters are responding to fires all that often, which means that there's no real reason for those airports to have more than one firefighting crew. The result is that an airport like St. Helena, which has 1 or 2 commercial flights a week, needs firefighting capabilities pretty similar to an airport like Heathrow, which has thousands. That's part of what balloons the cost of running such a small airport. Given the isolation of the island, weather forecasting is another crucially important yet challenging part of what's needed to keep the weekly flight reliable and safe. The UK Met Office stations meteorologists on St. Helena on more or less yearly rotations.
After a Saturday flight, I usually have the Sunday and Monday off. So when I come in on Tuesday, that's when I first start looking at what the weather's going to be like for the next flight day, which is usually the Saturday. As we get nearer to the time, I start to do more detailed forecasts for the airline. So on a Friday, I produce a detailed forecast for their estimated time of arrival on the Saturday. And then I come in at 4 o'clock on the Saturday morning and update that forecast and forward that to the flight operations.
The reason this is so important is so that they know when an aircraft is supposed to get to St. Helena Airport, it'll be able to land at St. Helena Airport.
The main problem is, because of the remoteness of the airfield, there are no nearby diversions. So they can't arrive here and spend 2 hours circling and then divert to a nearby airfield. If they come here, then they've got to be 99% convinced that they're going to be able to land. So I will be looking at cloud base and visibility as the major things that would stop them from landing at St. Helena. The reason being, because of their restrictions, they have to be visual with the airfield before they can land. So if the cloud base is below 900 feet, then they won't be able to see the airfield before their decision height.
Assuming the airline has that required level of confidence that the flight will be able to successfully land at St. Helena, Airlink will give it clearance to depart from Johannesburg at about 9 a.m. local time. It'll then make the 2-hour flight to Walvis Bay, Namibia, a more or less regular flight. At Walvis Bay, they'll refuel the aircraft's tanks, giving them about 6 hours of flying time, but also at the stop, they'll have to once again decide whether they'll be able to land at St. Helena. This time, the level of confidence has to be higher than it was even in Johannesburg, but assuming they are confident, the flight will take off, climb to altitude, and begin its 3-hour ocean crossing. But the decisions still aren't over. Throughout this crossing, the airline will be continuously evaluating the conditions on the island to assure they'll be able to land, and if they believe they can't, they'll turn back for Namibia. Assuming they continue on, eventually, they will then approach the island, drop altitude, and connect by radio with the airport's air traffic controller. But then, even once there, if the cloud levels are too low or the wind is too strong, the plane still won't be able to land.
So when they get here and they're not able on the first attempt to land, they will do a go around, they will go into a holding pattern, and they will wait for a few minutes based on what we have in terms of satellite image for the weather. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 5 minutes. It could be as soon as they go around, when they come back, they can see the runway. And then they'll be able to do a landing. So in the unlikely event that a successful landing cannot be completed, then the aircraft will have to divert.
St. Helena's closest diversion point is Ascension Island. It's about an hour-and-a-half flight north, so this is likely where any flight would divert if landing at St. Helena was not possible. There they have fuels and facilities, so the Airlink flight could give landing on St. Helena another shot the day after. In the time that St. Helena Airport has been open, no commercial flight has ever failed landing and had to divert. In fact, in the first 10 months of 2019, the airport didn't even have a single canceled flight. Every Saturday, at about 1:15 p.m., an Airlink Embraer E190 has reliably pierced through the clouds above St. Helena's airport, ready to drop off another load of eager tourists and wistful locals. Saturdays at St. Helena Airport are an event. Despite its tiny size, people start arriving at the building 3 to 4 hours in advance of the flight. While the plane might only seat 96 people, every flight sees a crowd far larger as extended families of every saint arriving and leaving seem to show up. Just for the flight day, there opens a bank branch, a gift shop, a luggage wrapping business, a cafe, and a restaurant. Those not taking the flight will stand in the check-in hall looking to see who's leaving, then make their way up to the restaurant once the passengers pass through security. Then, as the time draws near, everyone packs into the observation deck, far busier than that of any of the world's largest airports, and look to the left. It's reminiscent of sailors watching to be the first to see land, but in this case, it's saints trying to be the first to see their link to the outside world. A world that some of them have only seen through screens. They try to spot the small metal tube that represents the link between them and us. With patience, the time comes, and the Embraer E190 appears in St. Helena's skies. It makes its approach, usually jostled around by the consistently inconsistent winds, then passes the daunting cliff at the end of the runway, then glides smoothly into touchdown. That's when the airport truly comes alive. Only 75 minutes sits between the scheduled landing time and the scheduled takeoff time each Saturday, so as soon as the aircraft takes its right turn towards the apron, there begins a carefully choreographed dance. The aircraft is marshaled in, then first to approach are the air stairs, followed by the ground power unit that gives energy to the aircraft when it sits powered down. While the cleaners approach the aircraft, the baggage compartment of the aircraft is opened, the fuel truck gets into position, and the first passengers start to disembark. With certain jobs only needing to happen once a week, quite a few staff at the airport work multiple jobs. The firefighters, for example, go straight from their truck, assuring that the aircraft has landed safely, to handling baggage. At the back of the aircraft, all the sewage from the lavatory has to be emptied, and an ambulift is used to lift passengers with reduced mobility on and off. The pilots qualified to land at St. Helena are among the most senior and experienced at Airlink, which means there are fewer than 10 pilots who work the route. Therefore, they visit the island on average about once a month, but since the aircraft only stays there for just over an hour, have never seen more of the island than the airport. During their time on the island, though, they'll perform a safety inspection of the plane, and then, soon enough, it'll be time to load up. Boarding the 96 or fewer passengers doesn't take long, and quickly, the door will close, the stairs will pull away, and the aircraft will taxi back to the runway. It will take a turn to the north, roll its way down to the end of the runway, turn around, then thunder down St. Helena's spotlessly clean piece of pavement to take off on its 4.5-hour trip back to Johannesburg. With that, the clock starts ticking again as the airport preps for its next 75 minutes in the spotlight, and then everyone makes their way to their homes or hotels, starting their next week of isolation from the world. Of course, the Saints love the airport while they're at it, while they're standing in the observation deck watching the plane fly off, destined for Johannesburg in a quick 4.5 hours. For those that have lived their entire lives on St. Helena, the prospect of getting to South Africa in a matter of hours still seems like magic. Once people go home, though, the question that comes up frequently in conversation is, was it worth it?
2013 and 2014, when they were building the airport, was a big significant boom for St. Helena. The amount of people that were in and out of the island, a lot of St. Helenians saw airplane for the first time in their life. The economy was actually thriving. So it was a build-up to what was the airport going to bring for St. Helena.
I would say people expected the airport to bring quite significant change. Now, whether those expectations were reasonable is something that is perhaps debatable.
The once-a-week flight is okay, but at the end of the day, if you're bringing in a plane which can carry potentially 90 passengers, that's not enough to be able to generate a significant increase in the footfall on St. Helena.
I think there's an expectation that the service perhaps isn't delivering what it should. But I think we also have to take into account the facts that we're still not we're still a relatively untested market, both for tourists and also for potential investors.
Looking at the graphs, the airport has had some effect. In the 12 months after its opening, 3,337 people arrived on the island by plane. That's compared to just 2,616 passengers who had arrived the previous 12 months on the RMS. In the airport's second year of operations, 4,188 passengers arrived via the airport, which certainly is a measurable improvement, although overall visitor arrivals to the island stayed about the same as there was a period of overlap between the start of flights and the end of the RMS service. It's tough to measure the true success of the airport yet, just 2 years into service, but what's sure is that there has been no tourism explosion. Flights are expensive, infrequent, and indirect for everyone but South Africans, and this has kept the island a niche destination. The island certainly had to hurry up and wait, as, while the first flight might have been the impetus for change, it certainly didn't change everything overnight. Success for St. Helena Airport, however, cannot be measured solely by visitor numbers. It can also be measured in lives. The number of lives this solitary piece of pavement has saved.
I was in my last trimester, fairly normal pregnancy up until the last when my blood pressure kind of spiked. So the concern was preeclampsia, and they decided that I needed an emergency cesarean. So he came. Eli was born about 4 weeks earlier than expected. We had him around 6:30 Wednesday evening, and he had a bit of a restless night. Breathing wasn't so good, although that was to be expected because of the C-section. The next morning, the midwife came in and she said no, breathing wasn't normal, and they decided to put him on the ventilator and have him assessed. So they did so many tests, and he had respiratory distress syndrome. And about 11-ish on Thursday night, Dr. Kevin O'Brien and Helen Lawrence came into our room to say that he would need to be medevaced out. The RMS was on its last journey to the UK, so the first reaction was, how do we get him out? And then we were told that they had already decided to get a medevac flight in.
2 days after Eli was born, on a Friday afternoon, a small jet from a South African medical evacuation company touched down at St. Helena Airport, representing only the 4th arrival by a fixed-wing aircraft to the island. The team spent the afternoon evaluating Eli's condition, and then early the following morning, him and his mother, Patrice, were transferred by ambulance to the airport and brought onto the jet. After a quick 4 hours crossing the South Atlantic, they touched down in Cape Town and by 2 p.m. local time arrived at Vincent Pallotti Hospital with all the facilities Eli needed just about 5 hours after leaving the hospital in St. Helena.
If it wasn't for the airport, then I really doubt that Eli would have made it. It would have been a long wait for the RMS to come down, like another month, and then the week's travel to Cape Town. He probably wouldn't have made it waiting for the month for the ship to actually get there. So no, without the airport, I don't think Eli would have made it, would have survived.
Today, Eli is a perfectly healthy young boy. He's one of the handful of saints who quite directly owe their lives to the airport. Isolation is dangerous, and St. Helena's Hospital just isn't equipped to handle advanced medical conditions. Before the airport, that medical risk just came with the territory, and in some cases, survival was down to luck. The luck of where the RMS was on its voyage schedule. One can't easily argue against anything that saves lives, no matter the cost. But the truth is that, when the British government spent their hundreds of millions of dollars to build St. Helena Airport, they had more than the humanitarian benefits in mind. In the 2 years since its opening, the airport has brought change, but it has not yet fundamentally transformed what St. Helena is.
I think that the potential for the island is actually really quite strong. And I think that, but I think as with all emerging destinations, it's going to take a while. What I think is worrying though is that for a lot of people, it's how long will that while be? Is it going to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Nobody really knows.
Long term, the airport's ambition is, of course, to grow the island's economy. The UK's Department for International Development conducted a business case for the airport way back in 2010 and developed a tourism growth estimate for St. Helena based on how other similar islands fared in the industry after improving their access. This model, starting at about 1,000 tourists per year in 2016, projected growth to 30,000 yearly tourists in 2042, a number that has been subject to intense scrutiny everywhere from the St. Helena dinner table to the Parliament of the United Kingdom. The data show, though, that accounting for the 1-year delay in the airport's opening, current visitor arrivals are exactly on target for this growth. What that means is that the airport project is not doomed from the start. What will determine its success is what's to come, and the Christmas 2019 season is bringing something promising: sold-out flights. The holidays are by far the most popular season for travel to St. Helena, and with that, in the months of December, January, and February, Airlink has added Tuesday flights from Cape Town, a first for the island. In addition, there's another promising sign. In their first year of operation, the flights actually turned a small profit for Airlink. Longer term, the island has ambitions for an even more extensive network of flights. One goal would be to get a route to a South American city like Recife to allow for a more direct route from the Americas. Technically, this would be feasible as it's only a 4-hour flight. Commercially though, that's another question. Also on the wish list is a round-trip flight to Namibia to tap into their large tourism market. However, the largest tourist demographic for the island by far is British, and so the crown jewel of routes would be to the UK. Since before the airport even opened, there's been talk of a route to London via Cape Verde. Right now though, these are all just dreams. An airline would only take the enormous risk of starting a route to St. Helena if it proved not only commercially viable, but successful. That has not happened yet. The next couple years for St. Helena are crucial. As the number of successful completed flights ticks up, data will prove whether they're sticking to this line. The line that will determine whether St. Helena will survive economically into the far future. If they stick to it, they're in for an economic renaissance. If they start to fall below it, there's little hope for any sort of self-sufficiency, meaning the island will remain at the mercy of the UK's budgetary allocations. St. Helena was never supposed to change overnight, and the airport was never supposed to be a magic cure-all. The airport is a tool for change, not the impetus of change itself. For the island to fundamentally change, it has to sell itself to the world. It has to one by one convince people to come to it, to invest in it, to take a risk on a place that's competing with an entire world of options. Time has proven that St. Helena Airport is not the world's most useless airport. It has rather proven that it has the potential to become the world's most useful airport. An airport that could save lives, revitalize an economy, and connect a forgotten dot on the map to the rest of it. An airport that could rescue an island from falling into the same fate of so many like it, crumbling into irrelevance as its people are slowly drawn to the urban world. So now that the island has their tool, all they have to do is use it. As I mentioned at the start, this entire project was made possible thanks to CuriosityStream. They covered all the enormous production expenses, including flying a team to St. Helena, and all they asked in return was for us to mention the bundle deal they're running with Nebula, the streaming site founded by myself and loads of other great creators, and where this documentary originally released. If you sign up for any CuriosityStream subscription at curiositystream.com/Wendover, you'll not only get access to thousands of top quality documentaries and TV shows on there, you'll also get a subscription to Nebula at no added cost. On Nebula, you'll find tons of great original content like this one from loads of the internet's best creators. I can safely say this is the best value in the streaming world, so head over to curiositystream.com/Wendover to sign up for the bundle deal, and while you're at it, you'll also be helping support independent creators create great ambitious projects just like this.